Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Monday, July the 7th, where rehearsals are underway for the state visit by President Macron of France and his wife Brigitte, which begins tomorrow and will dominate the week. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Maybe President Macron will this week teach Keir Starmer a lesson from the French constitutional playbook and show him how to dissolve a troublesome parliament. That could come in handy with all the rebellions yet to come. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne, the podcast that gives you everything you need about the day ahead in British politics in time for your commute.
Well, we're still picking over last week's successful welfare rebellion and the extent to which it has changed Keir Starmer's premiership for good, or at least for the duration. There's just 2 weeks and a day till Parliament breaks up for the summer recess. But before we get on to that, is there any reason at all for Keir Starmer and for ministers to be upbeat?
Well, Anne, there is one person who just seems to be, and whether it was at PMQs or elsewhere, just seemed to be a little bit more perky than the rest, and that is Angela Rayner, the super loyal deputy who helped negotiate with those rebels last week, whose announcement about the Employment Rights Bill, the bereavement aspects of that have been pushed out today. Angela Rayner, in so much as there are any winners from last week, seems to be one of the big ones. It appears as if she's on the cusp of a sort of big internal Whitehall win with a new sort of fleshed out office of the Deputy Prime Minister, a bit based on John Prescott's sort of a DPM office of the early 2000s. And she's going to get a sort of, she's going to be bolstered in terms of her support in Whitehall and what she can do. Basically, partly as a result of all the hard work she's put in behind the scenes with the rebellions and her loyalty to Keir Starmer, it sounds to me as if that's about to be rewarded, potentially with a new dedicated team, a new logo, at a cabinet office base. Angela Rayner will be an even more regular figure in Downing Street. So that's something to look out for. There was a story in the Times about this last week. I've been hearing that the sort of expansion of her base is in part due to just how loyal she's been to Keir Starmer. So there does seem to be one person on the up in Whitehall.
One person, one sinner shall be saved in paradise. But I think that's very astute because Angela Rayner, not only has she managed to come through this unscathed, and it's hard to think of anyone else who's been close to this process of the disability and welfare reforms and that chaotic retreat last week, who has been enhanced. I think also, in fairness, when Angela Rayner came in as Deputy Prime Minister, there was a lot of talk about, oh, isn't she wonderful and isn't she flamboyant and isn't she down to earth, and her extraordinary backstory as a single mother and actually risen through Labour. But there was also a bit of a sense of has she really got it to be able to operate the machine, Sam? Can she really get a grip on big areas of policy? Of course, she has housing, and there are a few of them that are more fraught than that, and house building programs under her belt, and much more, including communities, etc. So it's quite interesting that you point out that she clearly does know that she needs to do that, and that this plan to set up, widen her power base, is also about getting more of a grip there on the cabinet office, on the clearing house of politics and policy. So it would appear that she's certainly not remotely naive about what you need to be important as DPM as well as have the job.
But for everyone else, it's just a question of keep buggering on. One cabinet minister told me on Thursday that the main aim of Keir Starmer now is to just get to recess. And then the whole of Downing Street, the whole of this operation can plan a bigger kind of reset. We just need to hobble through until then, they told me. And frankly, you can see from the news agenda this morning that there's not a lot that they've got to say, small announcements, but nothing big at the moment. And I can tell you, Anne, that those people in government, a lot of people in government are feeling pretty bleak at the moment, judging by the chats I had since we last talked.
Interestingly, you use bleak. I have just found confusion. Now, I mean, these things are very closely related. But when MPs feel confused, they feel bleak, and vice versa. I find there's still an undertow of worry about the events that led up to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, appearing so upset in the Commons, and some scepticism, perhaps a bit more than I might have expected, given that parties tend to rally round when one of their own is so publicly under pressure and in trouble, but some skepticism about the reassurance strategy since. It's really shaken the backbenchers. It's created an almighty headache for the government whenever there are other claims on the public purse, which is pretty often at the moment. And I think it has still raised questions about the relationship between Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer and how durable it is. Now, I know what we said on this podcast, and others said it last week as well, that what happened in order to steady the markets is that Keir Starmer had to throw his arms quite literally on the day after that Commons wobble by his Chancellor around Rachel Reeves. But that was also interpreted in some quarters as Keir Starmer realizing that he can't get by without Rachel Reeves. And that's a kind of not a great relationship with a Chancellor. You want it to be interdependent, but you don't want it to be something where you feel that they're tied together because he's simply too scared of making changes because he would then be vulnerable. So that huge sense of vulnerability, I think, is now shot through the top tier of Labour. What do you reckon?
If anything, I think it's worse than that. I think this government is in real trouble now. And I think that not because of political vibes, not because of the ebb and flow, not because of who's getting on with who, not because Keir Starmer and his backbenchers are grumpy with each other. I think this government is in real trouble for one reason that I'm going to stay laser focused on all the way through to November. And that is Rachel Reeves now has an enormous black hole. And if anything, I underestimated the size of it last week. An enormous black hole. And she's got to fill it all in November. And she's got to fill it all with tax rises. Now, this black hole, I believe, is in the order of £20 billion. Right? That's actually the figure that Bloomberg used as well. How on earth do we get to that when the rebellion last week only cost the government 5.5? Well, you've got that. You've got a further 1.25 billion from the winter fuel payment. There's another £1 billion for the Hillsborough compensation, which ministers think is inevitably going to have to be met when Labour meets in Liverpool in September. There will be £3 billion for that fuel duty freeze that's inescapable. But lower economic growth, a combination of the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump and smaller than hoped for retail sales, well, that's going to blow a £4 to £6 billion black hole. And then there could be a ginormous downgrade in productivity, which economists think the OBR is going to do this autumn, which could be up to another £9 billion. So a £20 billion plus black hole, Anne. And because of the nature of the OBR and Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, she's got to fill it all in November. And that, I don't think the public is ready for another tax rising moment on that scale, whatever you can point to for it. And I think that's going to feel like a massive shock to the system that is going to involve breaking promises.
Yeah, for sure, no one is going to be looking forward to that when they return from their summer holidays. And I'm also struck by the way that you passed that out there, Sam, that the 20 billion black hole, what does it remind us of? It was the 22 billion black hole that the incompetent Tories had left behind by failing to manage the public finances. Now, we all know that Rachel Reeves is particularly now, even she never was minded to relax her fiscal rules. The problem I think they've now got, I remember sitting with the Reeves team making a few, what we're like on this podcast, a few modest challenges to whether this language about black holes was a particularly useful one, because it depends what you describe and how you lay out the public finances, how you come to that calculation in large part, and getting real pushback that I didn't understand how bad things were and that they had no choice but to do it this way because of the 22 billion hole that the Tories had left behind. I think now that rhetoric is being flipped over and you're using it and with evidence, with obviously the OBR behind the figures that you're using, exactly the same charge is going to Labour. So I think you will get in the electorate, as well as people not liking the idea of, we'll come in a second to how that might happen, to how taxes might rise and what will be in the frame. But it's really hard, I think, for a government in the Animal Farm way, when it says, hey, we're different. We're the very intelligent pigs who've taken over the farm, and we look from man to pig and pig to man and see not that much difference. couple of billion here, a couple of billion there. I'm sure Snowball in Napoleon could have dealt with that.
If there's a lesson of Animal Farm, it's that everybody turns on each other. And if you look at the Sunday papers, you'll pick up something I picked up as well last week, which is there are anonymous government sources blaming Labour's backbenchers for where we are. They're saying it's all their fault. They're being naive. They didn't understand what they were doing. The dynamic is wild in the Labour Party right now. So you've got what feels like Treasury sources just pointing the finger at backbenchers going, you naive lot. Well, I can tell you, Anne, they're going to turn right back around and go, if you'd listened in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess. It's an absolutely toxic relationship at the moment between the top and the backbenchers. But let's get on to where the £20 billion black hole might be filled, which taxes.
Yeah, thrill me.
So I asked one cabinet minister last week, and they instantly reached for freezing income and national insurance tax thresholds. Now, you'll remember that's what Rishi Sunak did. It's a sort of trick by chancellors that they used in the latter half of the Tory years. And it brings in billions and billions of pounds. You know, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 billion pounds can be raised by basically freezing the rate, the level at which you go into a higher band. It drags more people into tax. It's a stealth tax, so people don't instantly notice it. But in a slightly underappreciated move, Rachel Reeves decided that she was going to unfreeze those taxes. And I went back this morning to check why. And back in the autumn, in her autumn budget, she said that she would not extend the freeze to income tax and national insurance thresholds from 2028. And now you've got cabinet ministers saying that maybe actually they will. That's reversing a tax cut that hadn't happened yet. So on one level, that's easy, or a bit easier than some of the others. But I went back and looked at what Rachel Reeves told the Commons was her reasoning for doing this. She says, if you extend the freeze, it would hurt working people. It would take more money out of their pay slips. I am keeping every single promise on tax that I made in our manifesto, so there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax and national insurance thresholds beyond the decisions of the previous government. In other words, she felt she had to unfreeze the threshold because of that promise not to rise income tax, and she explicitly said freezing them would be a breach of their manifesto. So, Anne, there you have it. If they do that, they're breaching their tax promise, which, I mean, actually may end up being the least worst of their options. But my goodness, is that one passage from last October going to be thrown back at Rachel Reeves if they do that?
And something else I think Keir Starmer has to worry about, can't miss it, it covered extensively in Politico Playbook and in the papers this morning, is this SEND revolt. Sam, SEND.
That's right. This is special education needs. There's an education white paper coming in the autumn. I flagged it as one of the things, once we get back from recess, that the whips are apparently worried about. That and the reforms to farmers' inheritance tax, the two things that could be revolting in the autumn. We told you about that last week, but it really already, this issue on special education needs seems to be snowballing, Anne.
So yes, Sam, those SEND measures are intended to overhaul funding for special needs pupils. Bridget Phillipson, as the Education Secretary, has been taking irate meetings with dozens of backbenchers. We're reporting Catherine McKinnell, the School Standards Minister, also in the eye of the storm about this. Two North East MPs, as it happens, both in the Department of Education. Now, Labour MPs are one worried about a repeat of the chaos of last week, and some thinking if they push hard enough on these changes, they can get the leadership to change course. And also dozens of special needs and disability charities have signed a letter in The Guardian today raising alarm. And at the core of this is the number of school pupils with education, health and care plans, that are bespoke plans to support their special needs in education. And that has gone up massively by about 71% between 2018 and 2024. Massive costs associated with that. Nearly 5% of pupils now have these special plans. We can talk about what's driving that. Sometimes it's more accurate, greater volumes of diagnosis. But one way and the other, government, and this was a problem that the Conservatives began to think about, and that the election probably saved them from having to do so more, is that £4 billion extra and £4 billion in extra real terms spending along the way since about 2016 to now. So the government is saying, let's have more targeted intervention, more focused on deprived children, where many, by no means all, but many of these diagnoses fall. The issue for Bridget Phillipson, Sam, is like, where would she get the money to do the alternative? And is the alternative really so skinny in what it can offer financially that people will be right to say, well, something is being taken away here in terms of a legal right to this special support? And that's the big casus belli.
It's fascinating. There are obvious parallels with the welfare debate. The question will be from Labour MPs, is the overhaul of SEND being driven by that desire to save money? Absolutely denied by Bridget Phillipson. She says that, kids are not going to lose out on the amount of money that follows them at school, even if the wider system is reformed. Do the reforms look like they're being done more patiently and more carefully, given that they're vulnerable? But moreover, what you have is disability groups being able to tell Labour MPs that this government is targeting the least well-off and the most vulnerable in society, which is a very difficult place for the Labour Party to be, and why the last rebellion on welfare and disability and this rebellion on special education needs are so tricky for the leaderships. And this is a caucus. This is a sort of ecosystem which feeds into the Labour Party that's incredibly powerful. If I may, Anne, in the last 2 minutes, I want to pivot to another lobby group that is incredibly powerful, that is making the case in a different direction. The disability lobby is a very important part of the wider Labour ecosystem, and it is something that Labour MPs understandably listen to quite a lot. But there's another massive lobby at the moment that some people think that the Labour leadership don't listen to, and Labour MPs don't listen to enough, and that is the business lobby. But they are going to be in full hue and cry all the way up to the November budget. I'm really struck, Anne. There is an article on Bloomberg today with a whole series of on-the-record quotes from CEOs and other big business bosses complaining about this government. And it feels to me like the pitch rolling has already begun by business to stop them being hit by more tax rises. They've got the executive chairman of Foresight Group, the infrastructure investment firm, saying, I'm struggling to see what's business-friendly so far about this government. You've got the CEO of Currys saying that the high tax burden is dampening the contribution of retailers. You've got the stories from the Times over the last few days about Pascal Soriot, CEO of AstraZeneca, potentially moving some manufacturing out of the UK. There's criticism of the industrial strategy, which some people think lack depth and clarity, according to prominent CEOs that didn't want to be named, according to Bloomberg. And you've got this problem around British Steel, which the government sort of part nationalised in the last few weeks, and it doesn't look as if the government's going to be able to negotiate those tariffs away that Donald Trump has imposed. The 10% tariffs look like they're there in perpetuity. So business also groaning, not always the first call and the first thing that Labour MPs reflect, but it just adds this sense of, a government that's been boxed in and the walls just creeping closer.
I think it was Michael Gove who used to say an anecdote is not the singular of data, but for a start, you've got quite a lot of data there, but it just struck me. I was talking to a quite well-known business figure in London who's actually rather close to Rachel Reeves, or has made himself close to Rachel Reeves, and he was reflecting, he's a supportive character. Even he was reflecting pretty much what you said there, that there is great unhappiness. There's unhappiness about the sequencing that has been applied to decisions that massively impact business. I mean, putting aside Trump and tariffs, over which we have very little control. But he just said there's one thing that really stuck with me, is that in opposition, Rachel Reeves, she spearheaded that movement to reconnect Labour to business and to the city, and to be seen to be listening. He said recently there is a sense among people like himself, as I say, not those who are just outright hostile to a Labour government or a Labour Chancellor, that she had been listening but not hearing, and that the other pressures have got in the way. And that will be really fascinating when we turn to the consequences of this summer. Who takes the pain, who takes the rap, and you really afford business to remain in the mood that you lay out.
I hope, Anne, you would never accuse me of listening but not hearing, which is the perfect moment, I think, to end this podcast. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow.
Loud and clear, Sam. See you in the morning.